In today's episode, we're going to explore the topics of grief, loss, and trauma in Avengers Endgame. We're going to specifically look at the three distinct ways that the Avengers team processes the loss and the Snapture from Thanos. I'm Jonathan Hetterly, a licensed professional counselor, and this is Psych Cinema. Psych Cinema is Shrink Tank's video series where I explore the psychological themes found in the films that I watch and love. Now, before we get started, do me a favor. Subscribe to our channel and click on the notification bell. That way, you will never miss out when we drop new content that explores the rich intersection of pop culture and psychology. Now, Avengers Endgame, I've seen it 3 times now in the span of 9 days, and I have to tell you, I was not bored for 1 second of any of the viewings. It is a remarkable achievement in filmmaking, but I really want to focus on the first hour of this film because I think it's what brings the most novelty and new ideas to the MCU universe, specifically how the team deals with failure, loss, trauma, and grief. And if you look at the original 6 Avengers, there's really 3 different categories in the way that the team handles the events after Infinity War. So let's first dive into Hawkeye and Thor, because they really deal with the loss and the events of Infinity War through externalizing or internalizing behaviors. So the film starts off with Hawkeye. We see him lose his family, and then he shifts to becoming Ronin, a warrior of vengeance. And basically because of the unfairness and the loss and the anger that he is dealing with, he is now inflicting vigilante justice on survivors that continue to do harm or injustice on Earth. And so he's filled with such loss and rage, and he can't tolerate the unfairness that bad or evil people were spared while good people or his family were so randomly kind of evaporated through the snap. And so he's really externalizing, and a sense of justice drives him to really vengeance and murderous means. Whereas we think about Thor, and Thor is really more about internalizing his grief and his loss. He goes into avoidance, he goes into depression, he really lets himself go. He starts to self-medicate through alcohol. You see in the film how he allows his chiseled, godlike body just go to waste to where he's got a beer belly. You see that avoidance to where he retreats and he's off the grid with the remaining Avengers. And even when Hulk and Raccoon go to find him, as soon as Hulk says the name Thanos, you see this very somber look come over Thor to where he implores Thor to not even mention that name. And this makes a lot of sense when you think about the larger MCU universe of what's happened to Thor. He's lost his father, he's lost his mother, his whole planet was decimated by Thanos. And then he blames himself for not killing Thanos and preventing the snap. So he's also got tremendous guilt as well as survivor's guilt. So does Hawkeye in that regard. So it makes sense that he would internalize and he basically becomes a shell of himself. And so that's really one specific way we see a couple of the team members handle the grief and loss through externalizing or internalizing behaviors. Now let's take a look at Captain America and Black Widow, because they take on this very unique role and way that they're dealing with it, which is they really go into shifting their roles. They go into caretaker roles. You see Black Widow becomes the de facto leader of the Avengers, and you see in the film that a lot of the other superheroes check in with her at headquarters, and she basically either gives assignments or all of the new data of problems in the galaxy go through her. And she's really trying to keep the team together. She's playing that family role of caretaker, a caregiver, the responsible one. And you see in the film how by doing that, it helps kind of shield or delay her having to deal with the loss and the grief. And she does that through just helping others, continue to help others. And we see that with Captain America as well. He's no longer wearing the shield. We know that there are still superheroes that are kind of continuing to police the galaxy. But Steve Rogers, he, especially when you consider his best friend Sam is lost through the Snapture, you see him helping lead a support group for people dealing with their grief and loss. Similar to what Sam was doing in The Winter Soldier, where he was helping like a support group for returning veterans of the Gulf conflict. And now with his friend gone, Captain Rogers, Steve, has sort of taken on that mantle and stepped into Sam's shoes, to where he's trying to kind of pick up the slack for what Sam did with his life before the Snapture really removed his presence. So you see Captain America and Black Widow dealing with their own grief in a way, but by just staying focused and finding meaning on something else. But they have this very tender moment at headquarters where both basically acknowledge that they haven't moved on. They haven't accepted this. This is just a way, this is a defense mechanism for them. And though it may be sort of a noble or admirable kind of defense mechanism and a lot of good may be coming from it, they still haven't fully dealt with their own loss and grief. And Steve really kind of, acknowledges that he's helping other people do something that he hasn't come to terms with. But then let's look at the last two Avenger characters and the surprising way that they actually maybe have dealt with this and processed it in a healthy way. You look at both Bruce Banner, the Hulk, and Tony Stark, Iron Man. And they really represent, through grief, two characters that have come to accept what has happened. So the Hulk, he felt very traumatized by the events in Thor Ragnarok and Infinity War, to the point where in Infinity War, he was unable to activate the Hulk. And now you see, at some point at the first hour of Endgame, he's been able to merge Bruce Banner and the Hulk and find the best of both worlds, to where he's got his logical, brilliant mind, but in the body of such a large-scale strength. But he's completely in control and composed, which the Hulk used to be just sort of an out-of-control rage monster. And in psychology, we really think of that as sort of merging, and we see that in a number of different ways. We see that those that are treating folks with dissociative identity disorder, like merging those different personalities so that they work in unison. But I think the best representation or parallel in psychology is when we think about dialectical behavioral therapy, this idea of everybody has this logical or rational mind, and then everybody has their emotional mind, and it's really when you can integrate the two together, the logical and the emotional, that you get the wise mind, using your critical thinking and your emotions, but always being in control and composed. And that's really what we see with the Hulk. And then we think about Iron Man, who throughout the Marvel Cinematic history, he's been the one that's been dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. And yet we see him really come out of the other end with acceptance. He's made a new life for himself. Him and Pepper, we assume, are married, but they're at least together, and now they're raising a 4-year-old daughter named Morgan. And in a lot of ways, we see a side of Tony that we never saw before the Snapture. And so not only has Tony maybe come to terms and acceptance with the loss and the grief and the trauma, but he may also be exhibiting something known as post-traumatic growth, where sometimes folks, when they go through tremendous loss, when they go through a tremendous trauma, instead of that event really dramatically changing the way they process their life and their brain processes fear in a negative way, people oftentimes find a tremendous sense of resiliency and grit or new meaning in life. And that's what we're seeing with Tony. We see a side of him we've never seen before, to the point when the team starts to assemble a new mission to reverse what Thanos did. It's Tony that has the most ambivalence, because he recognizes to change what happened may also put at risk this new life that he has made for himself. And by his own admission, it's a good life. He recognizes he's lucky because not a lot of people have been able to move on and move forward in the way that he did. And it's really interesting that instead of personalities at conflict, which is what we saw with the first two Avenger films, Endgame's really about how do you grapple and reconcile the different ways that they deal with loss and trauma in order to get the team back together to reverse the events of Infinity War. Now, I'd be really interested to hear from you all. What did you make of the Avenger characters and how they dealt with the loss and trauma? am I kind of overemphasizing Tony Stark and post-traumatic growth? Were you able to kind of handle or accept Thor's kind of shutting down and avoidance and denial? Give me your take on the Avengers and grief and trauma. Be sure to leave the comment below. You're also always welcome. In fact, we hope that you would also leave us a recommendation of a film that you would like for us to tackle here on Psych Cinema. You can follow us on Twitter and also check out shrinktank.com, our website where you're going to find articles, videos, podcasts, and more that continues to explore the rich intersection of pop culture and psychology. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Psych Cinema. I'm Jonathan Hetterly. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again at the movies.